All right, so we are moving through the book of John and focusing on the person of Jesus. But today I'm going to kind of wrap this message around two passages. John, of course, and also in Matthew, because this particular scene in Jesus' life is covered by multiple accounts, and Matthew gives us a fuller version. So I want us to dive into John chapter 6. We'll look at this scene here, and most of you know this story. It's where Jesus walks on water. So we'll look at the passage in John, and then we'll also jump to Matthew and read that as well. So John chapter 6, starting at verse 16. When evening came, his disciples went down to the lake, where they got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. But now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. Skip back to Matthew 14, verse 22. Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me!" Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." All right. So, right off the bat, there's two things I don't like about these accounts. First, Jesus sends the disciples off alone. I don't like that word alone, especially when it comes to Jesus. You want Jesus in your boat. You want him near you at all times. Because this guy's a powerful guy. You know you're good if Jesus is near you. But the fact that Jesus says, "Go on ahead, onto a boat," I don't like that. And second, I don't like the fact that while they're alone, away from Jesus, a storm hits. A big storm. And the boat is being buffeted by the winds. Buffeted looks like buffet. It seems like a good word. It's not. Okay, it means that the wind is tossing this boat around. Like they're going to drown if things aren't resolved. And so this is on Jesus' watch. They're alone. It's stormy. They're being tossed back and forth on a body of water that's terrifying, and that's on Jesus' watch. This is while he is on the earth with them as Lord, which is disturbing to me. Ever find yourself alone? You feel like you're alone? Being tossed by a storm? What's the deal with that? Isn't Jesus on watch? Like, isn't he my Lord and Savior now? Why am I caught in a storm, feeling alone, being tossed back and forth? Well, these two stories tell us that all this is backdrop to something Jesus is going to do, which is walk on water. And what's crazy is that there's an invitation to come join him. Peter says, if that's you, let me get out of this boat and come to you. And Jesus doesn't say, "Well, hold up there. Do you have the resume? Are you divine? Did you come down from heaven?" He just says, "Come." There's two responses to a storm. You can get busy drowning, or you can get busy walking. And Jesus says, "Come, walk on water." That's what I want to challenge you and invite you to, is this amazing experience of walking on water and what that means. But there are a few things for us to be aware of if we're going to walk on water. And the first thing is this: Be ready to see Jesus at 3 a.m. At 3 a.m. Why do I say that? Well, the passage begins, in Matthew in particular, where Jesus sends them out onto the boat after dinner. Okay? Excuse me. So dinner would be right around evening time, 5, 6 p.m. And they're supposed to get into a boat and cross the Sea of Galilee, which is not a big body of water. It should take them no more than a few hours. But they get caught in a severe storm because the way this body of water works is there are these cliffs, these rocky precipices that funnels the wind from high ground right onto the water. It's like a wind tunnel. And so cold, dry air from the high ground would get funneled in to the warm, moist air by the water, and it would cause all these severe storms. And the disciples are caught in one. There's a headwind, that's severe storm, the waves are kicking up, and it says that they're rowing till about the fourth watch, which is 3 a.m. So think about this. From 6 p.m. to 3 a.m., they are rowing, and they haven't gone anywhere. They're stuck in the middle of the lake. They've been rowing for 9 hours. And it's exhausting. It is tiring. It is frustrating. It says that Jesus climbed up a mountain to pray. And up there, he had a nice view of these disciples rowing for 9 hours. The question is, why does he wait so long? 9 hours into a storm. Same reason he waited for Lazarus to stay dead for a while. He waits until the impossible has fully set in, because it's against that backdrop of helplessness that he can show the full extent of who he is, of his power, and his glory. The invitation to the supernatural, the invitation to God's power, always comes in the form of an impossible situation, because it's in the storm where he reveals himself. If it's not a storm, let's say you've got a backache, you pop an Advil, the backache's gone. What do you say? I like Advil. If you want to buy something or there's a financial need and you get promoted and the money's there to meet that financial need, who do you give credit to? Yourself. But when you're faced with an impossible situation, the only person that can pull through and provide for you is God. And so the invitation to the supernatural always comes in the form of the impossible, which is why, even as believers, even on God's watch, we get caught in storms. Because it's His business to grow your faith. That's God's will for you. It's not to grow your portfolio necessarily, or to grow your pleasure in this world. I mean, when you are a believer, you come to understand joy and happiness in a different way, but His purpose is to grow your faith, because it is only by faith that you can experience God. If you imagine love to be a river, right? The Bible talks about love being like a river. Well, guess what the channel of that river is? Your faith. You've got big faith, it's a lot of love you can experience. Wide banks, deep gully. I mean, you can experience the love of God if you believe in Him and you know Him. Small faith, you get a trickle. And so God's business is to widen that channel, deepen the channel, so you can experience more and more of Him. But guess how He widens and deepens? Through trials, through storms, through difficulty. He'll wait till 3 a.m. He'll wait until you're done with yourself. He'll wait until you cry out, God, help me. Now, 3 a.m. doesn't literally have to be 3 a.m. It's more of a heart posture. It's that moment where you know I'm done with myself and I need God, and you confess, where does my help come from? My help comes from you, maker of heaven and earth. Are you at 3 a.m. in your trial, in your storm? Now notice how he comes. He comes walking on water, and that's not just to show off. It's not just a stunt. Think of what the disciples are afraid of. They're afraid of the water. They're afraid that they might drown. They're afraid that the waves are crashing in and coming into the boat. And what does Jesus walk on? The very thing that they're afraid of. The very thing they're terrified by. He sets up trials in your life. He sets up pain in your life. He sets up difficult things in your life so that when you cry out to Him, He can come walking on the very thing that you're broken by, the very thing that you're captive to, the very thing that you're afraid of. Jesus is going to come walking on top of that. I love what Tim Keller writes. It's up on the screen. This is a profound thing. God only allows Satan to accomplish the very opposite of what he wants to accomplish. He only gives Satan enough rope to hang himself. I love that. Right? It seems like Satan's got too much permission to mess with us, but only enough rope to hang himself. God hates evil. He's against it. He didn't create a world in which evil existed, but He permits it. Next slide. Why? He permits Satan only to bring evil into Job's life in such a way, in such an amount, that actually completely defeats it, defeats Satan's real intention. He permits evil and suffering to come into your life only to the degree that it defeats the actual intentions of Satan for you, only to the degree that it makes you a great person, only to the degree that it actually defeats itself. That's Tim Keller. Satan and the difficulties of this world will come against you, but Jesus is setting this up so He can come walking on top of it. Now, second thing, be ready to step out of your boat. There's a book with a great title. It's called If You Ever Want to Walk on Water, You Have to Get Out of the Boat. And I think it's so true. Because when you look at the person of Peter, it calls for next level faith. I say next level because on one hand, when you believe, your initial instinct is just to cry out and say, help me now, here. Help me here, where I am. Help me. And that takes a measure of faith because you have to believe in a God that is powerful enough to meet you where you're at and help you. And so by all means, you get caught in something, it's natural to cry, here, now, me, help. Maybe not like that exactly, but in those things are somewhere in that formula. But there's no commendation to that. That's just what you do when you're a child of God and you cry. When Emily, my daughter, 2-year-old, if I step away from her for more than 30 seconds, she starts screaming, Daddy! Maybe in her mind I've abandoned her or something. I'm like literally in the next room. But she'll start screaming in fear. And if I go to her, of course, I'll hug her, I'll embrace her, I'll kiss her, but I don't go, good job. Great job crying for me. So courageous. No, it's just like, I love her, and that's normal, and I respond to her because she's my child, but there's no commendation. Like, that's how just things are. God loves you. You cry to Him, He'll run to you. But at some point, we grow up, and we don't just go, me now, here, ah! It's also, you're over there. Can I come to you? Jesus, can I meet you where you're at? That's next level faith. All the disciples are in their boat crying. I don't know if they're verbalizing it or screaming in their heart and their emotions and their guttural cries, but they're saying, I'm drowning. Get in my boat. Is that you, Jesus? Get in the boat now. Right now, just walk right over and step in the boat. Peter's the only one who says, Jesus, can I join you? Can I join you? And Jesus says, come. He doesn't say no. He says yes. He loves next level faith. There's a story of a Roman centurion. He has a servant who he loves who is sick, and so they track Jesus down. And Jesus, I have a servant who's sick. Would you heal him? And Jesus says, I'll go to your home right now. To me, that's gold. It's like, let's do it. It's like, it's right over there. Let's go. But this Roman centurion's crazy. He says, look, Jesus, I know authority. Like, I'm a centurion. If I say this, my people do it. I can do it by command. You are Jesus. You can just command right now on the spot. I believe you can heal him. This guy's crazy. Just take up Jesus' offer. He wants to come home with you. Like, he can put his hand on the guy and kind of seal the deal. Why would you go the next level and say, Jesus, I believe you can heal him right now just by your word? Next level faith. And what does Jesus do? He celebrates it. He's like, there's nobody, even my own people don't have faith like you. This is amazing. This is amazing. Next level faith. Peter, remember this, guys. This is Matthew 14. In Matthew chapter 8, Jesus already had calmed the storm. This is not something new. Like the disciples should have known that Jesus can do this because they were in a boat before where Jesus was asleep. Remember this? And like they were in the same situation, and Jesus gets up and says, be still, and the whole thing just resolves. So it's not like they didn't know what's going to happen, but they were so afraid. But Peter's like, deja vu here. Like, I remember, and I'm going to put my faith in that. And I think standing on faith is even more solid than standing in my boat. I'm going to stand where Jesus is. I'm going to stand on promise. Now, we know things falter later, and we'll talk about that. But Jesus says, come. He invites that kind of faith. He celebrates that kind of faith. That's big boy, big girl faith. I don't know if you'll clap when I turn this around on you guys and say, are you ready for big boy, big girl faith? You know what that means? It means that maybe we move past the season of just meet me here. Because that's like a 2-year-old. I dropped my candy. You know, like I didn't get ice cream. I mean, it's like endless. It's endless. And I love her, but it's endless. Now, no, you'll get me wrong because God doesn't tire of us, but I think God waits for us to express the kind of faith because he wants to show us who he is. And he's not going to be able to show his full character always running to rescue us from fire drills. What he wants is to come and step out and stand on something. We are not suffering from a lack of knowledge for most of us. God's already spoken a word in your life. You already have 16 verses you've journaled about. You know your calling. You know what he's declared over you, over your finances, over your emotions, over your physical health. You know it. You've written about it. You've journaled. You've blogged. You've emailed friends. You've made crochet, or you've done all kinds of stuff with Bible verses. But when will you stand on it? When will you adjust your emotions to the promise? When will you adjust your expectations to the promise? When will you get out of your boat and join Jesus where he's at? Because he's inviting you. Come out of your boat. Stand on promise. The word of God spoken over your life, whether it be prophetic, whether it be a quiet time, a sermon you've already heard, a verse you've memorized, God has spoken over your life. He's asking you to meet him where he's at. I know in my life, there's been a couple moments where I've had to do that. And namely, like this whole church planning experience has been one large example of me having to step out of my boat, because there's no guarantees here. I was told West LA is the graveyard of church plants. So I said, great, let's do it. Let's start one right here in the most liberal side of Los Angeles. People who seem to have moved beyond church, let's plant a church right here. And sure enough, it's been incredibly difficult. Just even financially, it's super, super expensive here. And so we moved out here. By God's grace, we were able to buy a small fixer-upper in Culver City, but we had no idea it would take a year to finish. And so we found ourselves commuting from Pasadena, basically, to here, like every other day, and it was killing us, not just because of the mileage, but because I'm not with my people where I'm supposed to minister. And so we're paying a mortgage, but we're so far away, and my wife and I are like, if we're going to really plant a church in Culver City, we need to just step out in faith and begin renting something here, even if it's going to kill us. I don't know where the money's coming from, but we cannot plant a church from Pasadena in West LA. And so we stepped out in faith, started looking, and a friend cut us a check that covered a lot of our rent, just like this. Amazing. Fast forward a few months, we're launching our church. One of our donors, who was supposed to give tens of thousands of dollars, had to pull out for good reasons. But that put us in a huge bind. Like, it threw off all our expectations. All our numbers started to kind of not fit, and it was a panic. Like, are we going to launch this church without money that we need to sustain? But we knew God called us here. We were aiming towards Easter. We knew this was the right date. We went for it. And on the day we launched, a different friend cut us the exact amount we needed. Literally to the cent, the exact amount. We step out in faith. You join God where He is, join Jesus where He is. You get to stand on promise. I think of my brother Antoine. I'm going to just kind of share about him a little. I'm going to give him this pulpit eventually to share his whole life story. It's amazing. But he and his wife Kiona, son Jacob, moved out here thinking that they had a job, but that job fell through the moment they got here. And so they were unemployed. Off the bat, they're unemployed. And, they scraped together what they had. They survived for a few months. But eventually, Kiona, his wife, and Jacob had to go back to her parents' house while he continued to look for a job. And so we prayed. And that season lasted a lot longer than we thought, like 8 months. We kept praying. And at one point, I'm like, Antoine, maybe it's time for you to go home. Like, this is too hard. And I won't forget, Antoine, he wrestled with that, but maybe through a phone call, email, we talk all the time, so I can't remember exactly when, but he said, Dihan, I know I'm called here. I know my family's called here. And I'm not going to let Satan take that away. I'm going to stand on this. And so, fast forward another few months, and we're sitting at a cafe, and Antoine tells me, Dihan, I'm discouraged, standing on this promise, but I don't see anything happening. But I do have this interview, and I've had other interviews, so I'm not sure what this will amount to, but I've got this interview, it's a job I want to pray for this, but it's hard for me to believe. And so Antoine and I spent that morning praying, asking God to shift things in the heavenlies, because sometimes when you have prolonged unemployment, there's other things involved than just circumstances, right? And so we prayed into the heavenlies, we asked God to shift things, we prayed, and we asked the church for 48 hours to pray for this specific situation. A few days later, Antoine gets that interview, and just recently he got that job. There's a few more things we have to pray through, but he's going to be able to bring his wife home, continue out his calling here. But there is a guy who stood on promise through thick and thin when it was extremely difficult. And I know Antoine and Kiona have seen so much of God through that process. Where in your life is Jesus calling you to stand on promise? To not let your emotions be and your thoughts be defined by the storm, but to look at Jesus and let faith define who you are, what you believe, what you want in this life. I think of how little kids learn to walk. They stand up on wobbly legs, and there's no guarantee they'll fall, or they'll continue standing. They will fall. But they take one step at a time. Fall, get back up, another step. And they know mom and dad is right there. I mean, they have that assurance, but they got to stand up and begin to walk on ground that they're not sure will hold them. Right? But a lot of us are literally just locked in, just going, the whole time, and there's no walking. You get paralyzed. Your faith is at a standstill. Your life is at a standstill because you're not stepping into something by faith. If everything in your life is explainable, if always the numbers add up, if you only move as far as your common sense moves you, you will never see the supernatural. You'll never see God in power because God is always just on the other side of self-sufficiency. All right, third thing. Be ready to live with wind. Just keep your eyes on Jesus. Be ready to live with wind, but keep your eyes on Jesus. Because what I notice about this passage is that Peter steps on water and the winds are still kicking up. Jesus doesn't make it easy. It'd be nice if Peter walked on water and it was like glass, like he could just kind of skate to Jesus. But the storm is still raging. And that's often very true for us. That if you step out on promise, life doesn't get easier. It might get harder. And the moment Peter is distracted by the amount of wind and like his eyes drift and he starts to see the enormity of what he's facing, he begins to sink. That'll happen. The moment your circumstances become louder and more real than the promise and presence of God, you begin to sink. You got to keep your eyes on Jesus. And here's the thing, guys. Storms will not lessen as you walk in faith. Oftentimes, they increase because God is in the business of increasing your faith. It'll be one storm after the next. If you become a Christian to make your life easy, you've made a poor choice. You made a poor choice. Because discipleship means that we move and follow Jesus. And Jesus will take us through some difficult things because he wants to grow us and push our boundaries. He's going to make you face things you don't want to face, feel emotions you don't want to feel, face circumstances you really don't want to face. But like I said, each of those moments are opportunities. It's either drown or walk on water. And if you choose by faith to walk on water, you're going to see amazing things. I love the way this passage ends. They exclaim, "Truly, you are the Son of God." If I can have the worship team come up. "Truly, you are the Son of God." They all said that, but one person in particular could say that from the bottom of his heart because he walked on water. And he could say, "You are the Son of God," differently than the rest. What's beautiful about moving through storms and living by faith is that each of those storms are designed so you can know God a little better, a little differently than you knew him before. All the names of God, whether it be Jehovah Jireh, which means God who provides, is a name that's revealed through massive difficulty. If you read the life of the Israelites, they never got to know God's name in an easy way. It was through God providing when there was nothing to have. God, you are my provider. Or Jehovah Rapha, God my healer. The whole context of that is that you know him because he's healed you of your sickness, of your pain. And so you step out in faith and believe God will heal you, you get to know that name, Jehovah Rapha. Or Jehovah Nissi, God is my banner. God is my victory. Well, what does that imply? That there's a war, that there's a battle. And as you put your faith in God and he helps you overcome, that name is a name that's emblazoned on your heart. Every name of God is almost always revealed through a trial, through a storm. And as you step out in faith and put your trust in him, that's when you come to know that name intimately. Some of us don't know God because we're not living by faith. We're not trusting him in him amidst our trials. But every trial is an invitation to know God more. Every trial is an invitation to put your faith in him and know him more. The tragedy of living in your boat, never stepping out, is you will never get to know the names of God. You'll get to never know him, because to truly know him is to trust him, to experience him. And that's what these storms are for. If you can bow your heads with me.